President Zelensky is doing a little tour, and I have to say, I don't really blame him. There's all bad news in Ukraine. The Russians are on the offense. The Ukrainians have been completely incapable of breaking through the front line of the Russians' defensive positions. That front line has barely moved. The Russians, or the Ukrainians rather, have been able to gain almost no new territory throughout all of 2023. Despite losing tens of thousands of young Ukrainian men, all of whom are conscripts, many of whom were forced to go to the front line and serve as cannon fodder. Populations in the United States and the West are increasingly turning against funding this war, in part because they have fatigue, in part because they have so many problems at home that they'd rather use their resources to take care of, but also in part because they're seeing that so many of the promises that were made to them about what this war would be have turned out once again to be deceitful. And at the same time, President Zelensky's closest political allies in Kiev are now turning against him, warning the Western media that this war is failing, that only President Zelensky, who's delusional, doesn't realize this, and now increasingly complaining that he is becoming increasingly messianic and totalitarian and autocratic in his mentality and his intolerance for dissent. We've covered all of these developments in the Ukraine war over the course of really the last 2 years, over the course of the last several months. As the counteroffensive failed last night, we delved in deeply into the refusal of the Congress to provide more funds thus far. It seems as though the Biden administration is willing to make some hardcore concessions to give the Republicans what Democrats had been calling fascist measures to secure the border in order to extract another $60 billion from House Republicans to send to Ukraine. But the news is all bad for Zelensky. Earlier today, he appeared on Fox News Live, where he was questioned by a very sympathetic Bret Baier. Fox News has, especially with Tucker Carlson gone, been almost entirely fully supportive of Joe Biden's war policy in Ukraine. It's amazing to watch the largest conservative media outlet cheer President Biden's war policy in Ukraine, just like they're cheering his war policy in Israel. It really shows you that when it comes to foreign policy in this country, there's really no difference between the establishment wings of both parties. Even on China, President Biden has been very aggressive, the first president in decades to explicitly threaten China with war if they invade Taiwan. We've always had a policy of strategic ambiguity where presidents don't say. And Biden, whether through conviction or senility, has multiple times threatened China with war. He has expanded the strategy of militarily encircling China with bases, military bases in the Philippines, in South Korea, in Japan, in the South China Sea, in the Philippines, doing deals in Australia to augment significantly the U.S. military presence there. If you look at a map, China is surrounded by U.S. planes and bases encircled. And so it's very hard if you're a conservative or an establishment Republican to find grounds for criticizing Joe Biden's foreign policy. And Fox News, especially the kind of mainstream pro-establishment component of Fox News, which is most of them now that Tucker's gone, certainly include Bret Baier, clearly is in favor of Zelensky and the war in Ukraine. And yet Bret Baier did his job, which he usually does, of asking some hard questions, even in the gentlest way. And he specifically confronted President Zelensky on these accusations from his own allies in Ukraine that he's becoming an autocrat. And listen for yourself to what President Zelensky said in his own defense. We need to play this video.
There are critics who say that you've tried to consolidate power. Headlines that the Orthodox leader in Kyiv under house arrest, that you consolidated Ukraine's TV outlets, that you ruled out holding elections next spring, calling for unity. But then the mayor of Kyiv says that you're turning it into an authoritarian state. How do you deal with that criticism? What do you say to critics who are saying that?
Now, if you listen to that tone, I mean, if this were some sort of U.S. adversary, Bret Baier would be raising his voice. He'd be very aggressive. You can see his posture is very comforting, very loving. He says, look, you know, you have these people, they're criticizing you, they're saying you're autocratic. Well, what do you have to say, Mr. President? Let's listen to his answer.
I say such person from government or mayors think about the war, think about how to defend our people. Don't travel through the world each day. Travel to the front line. Ask people, ask soldiers what they need. Do this. Not build roads for today. Don't do it. Spend all your money to the weapon, to the drones, to the society, to the pensions, and etc. And don't cry, because you are leaders, and that's it. That's why we are, and that's why we stay, because mostly people are not crying. People stay and fight against Putin, and we don't have any enemies in our country. We can't have time for this, and we don't have it. We have only one enemy. This is Putin, and that's it.
But you'll stand from democracy going forward.
Yes, of course, and of course, because we are really defending democracy, and we are really defending freedom.
Mr. President, we appreciate your time, and we'll continue to follow the war.
Thank you so much.
I mean, it's such an amazing exchange on so many levels. Bret Baier didn't just say there are people accusing you of being a tyrant. He listed specific actions President Zelensky has taken that we almost always consider autocratic. First of all, even before the Russian invasion, in 2021, Zelensky closed opposition media outlets claiming that they were pro-Russian. Since the invasion, he has banned all opposition political parties. He has shut down the rest of the opposition media outlets that criticize him. He has ordered churches closed and arrested heads of churches, including some of the oldest churches in Ukraine of the Orthodox Church. There's an American citizen who's a pundit and YouTuber who's criticized Zelensky, who's in a dungeon, disappeared for the crime of criticizing Zelensky. These brave soldiers he claims are going to the front line to fight Putin are in fact being forced, dragged off buses and out of their workplaces, even though they're middle-aged and they don't want to fight, to go and fight. He's put deserters in prison for many, many years. He's canceled elections. So you had Bret Baier itemize all of the basis for the obviously valid accusation that President Zelensky is becoming or has become a full-scale dictator, a tyrant, anything but democratic. And you heard President Zelensky did not try and deny any of that. He instead invoked the mentality of a dictator. He said, look, we don't have time for dissent. We can't have internal debates. We can't have internal criticisms. No one should be criticizing me. We have one enemy, and that's Vladimir Putin, and we're all unified and marching behind me to attack Putin. In other words, he didn't deny the case against him, that he's a tyrant. He affirmed it. He justified it by saying there can be no dissent. And then because Fox News is so pro-Ukraine war, and I am absolutely convinced, based on everything that I know, and I've talked about this before, that one of the reasons Tucker Carlson had his show canceled, despite having record ratings, despite being the anchor of that audience that he brought into Fox, that nobody has or can replace, despite having no real scandals in his background. Liberals will say he was the one who was responsible for the large defamation judgment against Fox that Fox actually agreed to pay against Dominion, when it's just not true. We've gone over this before. Tucker was not only one of the people not pushing the election fraud claims, he was debunking it in real time by calling Sidney Powell a liar, by saying she had no evidence for her claims, by highlighting the fact that they had called her onto his show where he wanted to ask her, where's the evidence for these extraordinary claims, and she refused to go on. So he didn't have the kind of scandal of sexual harassment that brought down Bill O'Reilly or Roger Ailes. He didn't have a problem with ratings, quite the contrary. When Tucker Carlson was canceled, his show was canceled, Republicans in Congress and in the Senate, the establishment Republicans, like the cowards that they are, ran to Politico and other outlets like that in D.C. and celebrated Tucker's cancellation. They said this cancellation, the fact that Tucker Carlson's off the air, has made our lives so much easier because of how much success he has had in convincing our voters to turn against the Ukraine war. We want to fund the Ukraine war, but Tucker has played a major role in convincing right-wing and conservative and Republican voters that that war is not in their interest. That was a major source of anger on the part of cowardly Republicans who would never put their name on that accusation publicly, but ran like little mice to Politico and said, please give me anonymity so that I can talk freely about how happy I am that Tucker Carlson is gone. Fox News is owned by the Murdochs, who have always been more neoconservative, who have always supported all of the wars of the Bush-Cheney administration. They're trying to take back control of the Republican Party, wrench it out of the hands of the populists, of the Trump-led anti-interventionists, and put it back into the hands of people like Nikki Haley. And getting Tucker off the air was crucial because he was one of the few people that lots of people trusted. Republicans listened to Sean Hannity and other hosts on Fox, but these are already hardcore Republicans. Tucker was attracting a much more diverse crowd, a younger crowd, and he was having a big effect in a negative way from their perspective. So now that Tucker's gone, Fox is all in again on the war in Ukraine. And so Bret Baier, who is very capable of conducting aggressive interviews, he usually doesn't let people evade his very direct question, sat there and listened to Zelensky ignore every item that Bret Baier cited as evidence for why Zelensky has become authoritarian. And instead of following up, he used this like baby voice, this comforting voice to say, but you are going to continue to keep Ukraine democratic, right? And Zelensky, again, didn't even take that chance and say, oh yeah, I'm going to keep Ukraine democratic. He said, we're fighting for democracy. We're fighting for the democratic world. That's why you have to give us our money. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.